Hello and welcome to part 3 of Chord Melody Ukulele. And this is where it gets exciting, because in part 3 we're going to do an arrangement right now. I'm going to do it as we make this video. Now there are things to download in the links below, but the actual final arrangement from my perspective here making this video doesn't exist yet. I made the tablature after the video based on what I did in the video, so you're looking at the arrangement now if you've downloaded it. But to me here, it doesn't exist yet. I haven't made it yet. We're going to do it now in the video and take you through the whole process of creating a chord melody arrangement of the tune Danny Boy. So at this point, what have I done? Well, I've selected the tune and I have found the melody line written in standard notation. And that's one of the things that you can download to go with this. Now, reading music is quite a scary thing, and people who can't read music might look at this and immediately switch off. I urge you not to, because we're going to get away from that written music quite quickly. But here's the thing. If you're looking for the melody of a piece and you're limiting yourself to tablature, there are two problems. One, you're suddenly limiting yourself to ukulele players who've made the tablature for ukulele, because tablature is only any good for the specific instrument. So there might be lots of piano players who've got the music out there and guitar players and whatever, and none of that will be any use to you if you're relying on tablature. Secondly, if there's tablature for it, then there's probably already an arrangement that someone else has done. And that means, well, we're not going to have the fun of making the arrangement ourselves. But don't worry. What I've done is I've taken this melody from a piece I found online, I've put it into my software, and then I have added tablature to it, or rather my software has dealt with that for me, and I'll put a link to the software I use to generate all of my tablature and notation for all of my lessons, books, magazine pieces, whatever. I've all been done with this pretty inexpensive piece of software. And what happens is, as I read the music, we'll talk about that in a second, and I input the tablature, it generates the music for me as well, and I can look at the music that's being automatically generated and compare it to my original source material, and that's like a double check. But let's talk about reading music, because reading music isn't that difficult, and we're not talking about just looking at a piece and being able to play it. We're talking about decoding it and turning it into tablature. Now that might be a very slow, painful process, but you will get quicker at it, and if you already can read some music, it might not be that painful or slow. But there's a lot of music out there, and if it's older music, a lot of it is available for free. And I will put some links again down below to places that I like to go to look for older, out of copyright music. I also have a large collection of old sheet music myself. Now, if you're thinking about modern pop songs, you might run into some problems there, because they are not only under copyright, but are often owned by these huge companies that very aggressively defend their copyright. So you might find that that sort of stuff, if it does appear online, gets taken down. But you can often buy sheet music books, or you can download the official sheet music from sheet music suppliers online, and it might cost you $1 or $2 to get hold of it. But once you've got it, you can then use it to create your own arrangements. So on the screen now, you'll see the sheet music to the melody of Danny Boy. And as I say, I found another site that had this free, and this tune is out of copyright, and I simply put it into my software, and there it is on the screen. Now this is what we call a lead sheet. It has the melody written in standard music notation, and then it has the chords that go with it written above. And that is all we need to create our own arrangement. We need to be able to hear the melody, and we need to be able to hear the chords. Now the good news is my software, as well as having the music in there, I've also input the tablature. So here's another one. Now a very skilled player might be able to play directly from a lead sheet, either in tablature or probably more likely straight from the sheet music. There are lots of musicians who, if you give them a lead sheet, will spontaneously create some kind of chord melody arrangement. It can be done. But I'm not expecting us to do that right now. What we're going to do is we're going to use the raw material and step through very carefully, adding our knowledge of chords to the melody that we have to create an all-in-one chord melody arrangement. If you've got the tablature in front of you now, let's play through the melody. Now don't worry too much if you don't know about how to read rhythm. Just listen to how it's going and use your knowledge of this tune. It's a very popular tune. If you don't know the tune, maybe whiz off and listen to a few different versions of it now just to familiarise yourself with it. But grab the tablature and let's play along together. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. And there's the melody. And it's good when you're doing a chord melody arrangement to play around with that melody and get it under your fingers and into your head before you start doing anything else. Now, the one decision I did make before starting this was what key we were going to do it in. And there's a reason for that. I looked at the lowest note in the melody and the highest note in the melody. And I found that the lowest note in the melody was the 2nd fret on my C string, the note of D. And the highest note in the melody was right up here on the 12th fret of my 1st string, my A string. Now, I can't really go any higher than that. Some ukuleles only have 12 frets. I've got a few more, but it's going to get very difficult to play chords with those notes right up there. I also couldn't go much lower. This puts it in the key of F. Now, I could have gone a little lower. My lowest note on the 2nd fret could have gone down to the 1st fret, but that would have put me in the key of E, and if I'd gone down one more I would have been in the key of E flat, and the chords start to get really nasty. The key of F isn't too bad at all. And really that key is going to be the obvious one to choose to play this tune, simply because of the wide range of the melody going from right down here to right up here, and having to fit that on and do it in a key where the chords are going to be fairly easy to reach. So I made that decision. I could have found this written in a different key and immediately run into problems, and that's where you would have to look at writing it out in a better key to work with. But for the purposes of this, I've put it in the key of F, which fits nicely within 12 frets, so it should be playable on any ukulele. Now let's have a look at the chords that we've got, because we can't do chord melody without first of all knowing the melody and knowing the chords. Let's have a quick whiz through the chords. Notice there's a little run in. Do, Danny, boy. That leads us in on boy of Oh Danny Boy. That's when the chord of F would come in. So if I just hum that, you'll be able to hear where we are and see if you can play the chords with me. Da da da, F, F7, B flat, F, D minor 7 to G7 to C7, F, F7, B flat, F, quick G7 to C7, and F. B flat, F, D minor, G7, C7, F, B flat, F, D minor, F, G7 to C7 to F. Now if there were two of you, one person could play the melody, one person could strum those chords, and you'd have a lovely duet arrangement of Danny Boy. So now let's get down to turning that into a chord melody arrangement. Now I don't expect you to instantly be able to do some of the things I'm talking about in here. What we're doing is going through the process, and maybe you don't know lots of inversions of chords yet, or maybe you do but you don't spot one of the ones I'm going to use, and that's fine, because in going through this process it's going to give you a little bit of insight into the kind of things we think about as people arranging music like this, and it'll give you some ideas and some little jumping off points for when you create your own. Now bear in mind, what I've got in front of me here is the lead sheet. It's what we were just looking at with the melody and the chords. An arrangement doesn't exist yet. I've not created it. So when you see me reading things here, I'm going to stumble. I'm going to find one way of playing things and I might change my mind. The tablature you've got is what I have come to at the end of this as probably the best thing I can come up with as a quick arrangement for this. So let's start playing right at the beginning. Now as we said, that happens with no chord. The chord doesn't come in until we hit that next note. So we can just play. Now here, our melody note is the open first string, and we need an F chord. Well, that's nice and easy. Our first position 2-finger F chord has that note at the top. So we have, lovely. Then the next note here, we could just play it on its own. That G note at the 3rd fret of the E string. Now, of course, I could play that note as my open high 4th, but I'm trying to make this work with a high 4th and with a low 4th. So when I talked about the key and things like that, you might have thought, well, I can go down lower than an open C string, but not if you've got a high G. I'm going to make all of these fingerings imagine that we can't use that high G. It'll work on either or. So we have this. Now we need an F7 chord, but the melody has gone back to that A note. So we could just play the chord 2, 3, 1, open. And then we've got an F7, but with an A at the top. The melody then goes up to the 5th fret, down to the 3rd, and then open. And I could do a couple of things here. I could play the F7, let go of that, play 5, 3, open. That would be fine. I could also try and keep hold of that F7 and put my little finger down, it's a bit of a stretch, and I could strum the whole chord again. And then 3rd fret, and then take it off. It's up to you what you do there. You could do what we did in part 2, which was a chord for every melody note. Or you could do more like we talked about in part 1, where we had a chord and then a few notes and then a chord. Or any combination of those. You could do the chord, then that high note on its own, and then when you got back down here to the 3rd fret, you could do another chord, and then you could play the last note on its own. So you might have... It doesn't matter, and this is part of creating an arrangement. We're not doing something that has a strict formula. People have said, are there any ways of using apps and things to make these things happen automatically? And there isn't, and nor should there be, because this is part of being a musician. This is part of the artistry and the skill of playing a piece of music on your instrument and making that piece of music work on your instrument and work for you. So if you find one of these stretches really hard, then change the way you play it so that you're not trying to hold the chord and put that note down. Something like that. And if you can make those stretches, maybe you like this one better. Okay, then we go to a B flat chord, but the melody isn't on the 1st string, so we don't have to hold down a full B flat chord here. We could play a B flat as 3, 2, 1, and not the A string, and then put our little finger down on the 3rd fret of the E string. So we get 3, 2, 3, take off the little finger, there's our melody note hiding under the index finger, and the next melody note is also in the chord on the C string. Now you don't have to play it with 3 fingers and your little finger playing that melody note like that. That's one way of doing it, that's how I might like to do it, but you could actually, instead of playing those 3 notes and putting that finger down, you could put down the lowest 2 notes of a B flat chord and that melody note at the 3rd fret, but then you would have to let go to this one. I go to that one because I use it in lots of chord melody pieces. Those little combination of notes over a B flat chord have cropped up in more than one piece I've played before, so that's something I like to do. However you finger it though, you could again strum. Or strum the first one, play a melody note, whatever you want to do. That's given us the first line of the tune already. That's nice. Of course, I'm being a bit clumsy here because this is all new to me, so I'm trying to remember where I'm going and what I just said. But that's our first line. Then we have a very similar thing happening again. Now, strictly speaking, at that point, the chord is still a B flat, but we've heard the B flat. We can let it ring, and then we can stop playing that chord. Just play those 3 melody notes, and this time we have an F chord, but we have the 3rd fret of the 1st string. Well, that's fine. We can play our 2-finger F, and we can add that one with maybe our little finger. Okay, the next note is up at the 5th fret, and again we could either stretch or we could just play that note on its own and let go of the F chord. Then we go to a D minor 7 chord, and we need the 3rd fret of our A string as the melody note, and that's fine because when we play a D minor 7 chord down here in our sort of first position, that's exactly the note we already have, 2, 2, 1, 3. Then we need an open string, so we just take that little finger off. And then we need a G7, but we only need to go as far as the 1st fret on the 2nd string. So I form that G7, but I don't have to put down a finger on the 1st string. And I'm just going to strum 3 strings. Then the next melody note is that open string. So the second line so far is... And then I need a C7, but with the note of G, the 3rd fret on my E string, on the top. Now you could just play open, open, 3 there. That would give you a C, not really a C7, but that would work if you wanted to do that. When I'm faced with a C7 and I haven't got access to my 1st string, which is often where you'd put that, I quite like to do this little shape. It looks like a G chord shape, but there's my G, I'm on the wrong strings and I'm 1 fret higher. 3rd fret for those 2, 4th fret for that one in between, and that gives me 3 notes of a C7 chord, but it lets me finish on the 3rd string. Now I know my G string note is higher than that, and I've said before about trying to avoid high notes on the G string that are higher than the melody, but what we can do is we can use this idea that the last thing we hear, the most recent thing we heard, will sort of take precedence. So if I roll over those, that's highest, but that was the most recent thing we heard. And of course if you've got a low 4th, it makes no difference at all, that works just fine. Now, here's a wonderful thing when you're playing tunes like this: repetition is your friend. The 3rd line is exactly the same as the 1st line, so we can do exactly the same in our arrangement. Okay, so I've done exactly the same thing as I did on the 1st line. So now we're 3 lines in, let's finish this little phrase, that's the first part of the tune, and we're about halfway there. So the next line starts off in the same way yet again. Little walk up to an F with an A melody note. Then we go to the 1st fret, and we can just play this as a note on its own. And then we need a G7, but we need an A melody note. Well, that's easy. We play a G7 and we just take off the finger on the A string. So we have our G7 chord, but instead of that note that we'd normally hear, we've got our open A string. Then we need the note of G, and if we're not using our high G for this, we need to put down a finger on the 3rd fret of the 2nd string. Then we need a C7, and this time we need our 1st fret of the E string on the top. So I'm going to struggle to do a C7 that sounds nice with that on the top. So I'm just going to default here to a C chord. Open, open, 1. Then we go back up to that 3rd fret. And again, if you wanted to, you could keep doing that, or you could do that C7 we just had, and that would bring the 7th in. That might be quite a nice thing to do. And then we need an F to finish, but an F with the note of F as the highest note. So we're going to avoid playing our A string. Wow, I've thrown a lot at you there, and I probably can't remember half of it, but I'll try and play that first bit and try and remember all the things I did. So here we go. Sounds pretty good. And yes, there were lots of things that I could have done. I could have, like I mentioned earlier, played full chords on some of those notes, but I chose just to play single notes. And again, this is for you to take this arrangement when it's finally all written down and you've got it, to make those decisions for yourself. Now the second part of the tune goes quite high, so this is where we're going to have to start thinking about other ways of playing chords. Right now, every single chord we played was one of our fairly familiar 1st position chords, right down here near the nut. The only one that was a bit unusual was that C7 that I showed you, but you didn't have to use that. You could just play a C instead. But now we're going to have to find some ways of playing further up the neck if we're going to reach the melody. So we've got to the end of the first part of the tune, which is that G7 to C7 to F part. Now we start going 3, 5, 7, 8. That's quite high up, and we need to still have an F chord. Well, 3, that's fine. We've done that before. An F chord with the 3rd fret with our little finger. We've also done an F chord with this note here at the 5th fret, this D note. It's going to get a little bit difficult though to start going up to the 8th, the 7th and 8th. That's just not going to work. So how about this? How about we play F with the 3rd fret note on the top with our little finger, but then just bar the 5th fret. Now, that's essentially an F6 chord, but really it's just an F chord, 5, 5, 5, 8, but we've lost that 8 off the top to get the melody note, which is also at the 5th, so we can do it just like that. Then we can easily reach the 7th fret just by putting, say, your ring finger down and keeping that bar there. And then we could put our little finger down on the 8th. So we get... And we could play that as a chord for every melody note. Or if you wanted to, you could put in the odd chord, whichever one you feel comfortable doing. But that's led us up this big sort of rising thing right up to these really high notes. Da, 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 da. Then we're back to our 7th fret on the 1st string. Now we need a B flat, but we need that 7th fret note there. Now that's just not going to happen. A B flat's hard enough as a bar chord down here without reaching up to the 7th fret. But there is a handy little B flat chord shape. It involves avoiding one of the strings to make it playable, certainly to give us a free finger to get melody notes. But if you were to play a regular old G chord down here, make sure it's a G and not a G7, and slide it up until your first 2 fingers are at the 5th fret, and don't play your G string. Now that is a B flat chord, and we can use our little finger to play that 7th fret melody note. Oh, and lo and behold, the next melody note's at the 5th fret, so we can take our little finger off and we're already there. That's handy. Okay, so we have this. F. And I could play that as a whole chord if I wanted. Now we need a B flat with this 3rd fret note here, and I could play a full B flat and put that down. It's a bit of a squeeze. I'm going to stick to, I think, playing the highest 3 strings that I did there. And that would mean I would play nothing on the G string, the 2nd, the 1st and the 3rd frets. 2, 3, 1, nothing on the G string. And that's just the highest 3 strings of a B flat chord, but with that melody note stuck on the top. Where does it go next? Oh, it goes back to the 5th fret, so we can go back to that little G shape. So we have this. Brilliant. Then we have an F with our 3rd fret again. We keep finding the same melody notes over the same chords. That's no coincidence. It's going to happen a lot. We have an F chord with the 3rd fret here. Then the next melody note is the open A string, so I could play it on its own, or I could strum it. And the next melody note is the 1st fret that we're already holding in the F chord. And again, I could play just that, or I could strum just 3 strings. So let's see what we've got there. So I remember what I did. We started off down here. That works nicely. Let's see if this bit of the tune does what the first half does and repeats itself. Let's see. Well, it kind of does, doesn't it? We've got, yeah, we can do that. 5th fret bar again, add the 7th fret. Ah, now we got to this point, 5, 5, 5, 7, an F chord with the 8th fret as our melody note. It was an F last time, but we've got a D minor here. Now, there's not a lot of difference between an F and a D minor. You've got to try and get that ring finger over onto the 7th fret of your G string to turn that into a D minor. We could do that. It's a bit tricky to get it to sound clean. It's a nice chord change, but if you really struggled with that, you could just play it the same as you did last time as an F chord and think of that as a D minor 7 rather than a D minor. But if you can turn that into a D minor, it does sound quite nice. That's the only difference. Then, oh, now we went to B flat before, we're going to G7 here. So it started off the same, but now we're off somewhere else. So what have we got here? We've got a bar of G7, but the melody note is going to go 7, 5, 3, open. Okay, how are we going to do that? We could play our G7 as 4, 5, 3, 5 and stretch our little finger up to the 7th. Ah, that's handy because the next melody note is where I just said it was for the G7 at the 5th fret. So we play our G7 like this, but we're going to play this melody note at the 7th. Then we can just slide it down and we're holding the same chord, and there's the melody note again. Then we need a G7 with a 3rd fret, so we can't stay in this chord shape and slide down there very easily. So let's move down to this G7 and add or slide up, whichever one you feel comfortable with, but change this 2nd fret note to a 3rd fret note, and then the melody goes to the open string, so we could just take both of those off. Now if you're thinking I'm finding these very, very quickly, it's because I've done a lot of this, and what happens is the more of this you do, like I said earlier, it's no coincidence that certain melody notes happen with certain chords. So I'm very used to finding a chord and finding melody notes that are a stretch of a finger or a finger lifted off. It's something that the more you do of this, the quicker you get at it. Now we need one more chord and we've finished this line. So we need the last bit. 3rd fret, 2nd string, and the chord has changed to C7. So just like before, we could either play a C, open, open 3, or we could use that little sort of G chord lookalike, but on the wrong strings at the wrong fret. 3, 4, 3, and that gives us a nice C7, but with this G note on the top. I like that one. I use that one a lot. So we're almost there. Let's see what we've got so far in this second part of the tune. We're on the home straight now, but this is the bit that goes as high as it's ever going to go in the piece, right up to the 12th fret. We have the 3rd fret, and then all the way up to the 12th fret, and somehow at this point we've got to play an F7 chord. And that's going to be pretty tricky. I mean, we could do an F chord by barring the 5th fret and stretch to there. It's not an F7, it's an F, but it would work, but I wouldn't like to do that stretch on anything much bigger than my soprano. If you've got a tenor, that's going to be really difficult. Let's see what else we can come up with. Ah, right, a G7 chord down here. If we took that G7 chord, you might not have enough frets to do this, but that's at the 1st and 2nd frets, which is the equivalent of the 13th and 14th frets, an octave higher. And if we took a G7 and lowered it by 1, it would be an F sharp 7. And we lowered it by 1 more, it would be an F7, which would be 12, 11, 12. And there's our melody note. So it's just like a little G7 shape. We're going to avoid the G string, just like before, and just play 12, 11, 12. It's quite a tricky one to get, but it's much easier to do a little 3-note chord than either a big stretch or try and play all 4 strings when you squash that high up. So that's our F7 with our highest note. That only happens once. We immediately go down to the 10th fret, and in the next bar it stays on the 10th fret, and we somehow need a B flat chord. Well, we had that little B flat chord that looked like a G at the 5th fret. We could maybe stretch a little finger, but again, hard enough on a soprano. Right, what about, yeah, if that's a C6 chord, then our 12th fret is also a C6 chord all the way across. And just like we did before to find that F7, if we lower that by 1, it's a B6, and if we lower it by 1 more to the 10th fret, it's a B flat 6 chord. And we had this earlier on where we don't really want a 6th chord, but the chord and the melody note together end up giving us that chord. So if we just play a bar there, 10, 10, 10, 10, that's a B flat chord with the 10th fret note on the 1st string. So we've got this. That works. Then the melody goes down to the 8th, then to the 5th, and we're on a B flat chord now. We can do a B flat chord there, our little friendly G shape again at the 5th fret. 5, 6, 5 gives us the right melody note. Then it goes to the 8th fret, but we can just stick a little finger down there. And then we're back to an F chord and something we've done before. 3rd fret, open, 1. So we could, and if we wanted to, strum all 4, take off that finger and just strum 3 strings. Or we could go, all depends on how you want the arrangement to sound. Right, let's see if I can remember what I did for the second part of the tune. We did something like this. F, that big climb. Then again, the minor this time, that one. And then that big stretchy G7. And then that little C7. Here's that high bit. Right up to the 12th. B flat, F, just about. And then we go to a D minor. And this is nice. We need nothing on the first beat, then we need an open 1, 3. Well, we can do all of those whilst holding down a basic D minor. If we start with a D minor and take off our index finger, we could just play that note, then strum 3 strings of the D minor, then put our little finger down on the 3rd fret of the E string. Then we're back to an F, and the melody note is A, and it jumps right up to the 5th fret. So you might be able to reach that with your little finger, and you could play the whole chord or just play that one note. And then it's down to the 3rd fret. We're still on an F chord, so we can just strum an F chord with that 3rd fret note held, and then our open A string is the next melody note, which fits with an F chord. So here's another one where you could go, put some of the chords and some of the melody notes, or you could do a chord for every note. And now the melody starts to drop down quite low. It's now onto the 2nd string, 3, 1, then the 3rd string. That's going to limit our options. Back up to the 1st fret on the 2nd string, and then it stays there. But we go back to an F chord under it. We've got a G7, C7, F that we've somehow got to fit under these notes. And now we're on the 2nd and 3rd string. We're really limited with how many notes we can play below that. Compromises are going to have to happen here. We can play, it's not really a G7, but we can play the bottom part of a G chord. Open, 2, 3. And that gives us, well, a G chord, but with this G note at the top. And the melody note then goes to the 1st fret, so that turns it into a G7, if you like. So I'm playing it with these 2 fingers, because then this finger can go on the 1st fret, and I can lift that one off, and I can do this. And again, I could play the chord both times if I wanted, or just that single 1st fret note. Here's a tough one. How do we play a C7 and this one note of D on the 2nd fret of the C string? And really, we can't. So either we make it a single note, and we've had lots of single notes in between the chords before, so why not here? The other thing we could do is to play that note and whatever we have available below it that fits. And in a C7 chord, we have our open G. Now, if you've got a low 4th, you could play that, your low 4th, and then this note, and this would still be your highest melody note. For me, I've got a note that's above my melody, so I have to make the choice as to whether I want to have those 2 notes together to fill out the sound, or whether having that high G is going to detract from it. And I'll have to try and play it to see if this works or not. But before we get any further, let's finish the bar. We then have, still on a C7 chord, this 1st fret note on the E string. So I'm just going to go for, like we did before when we had this, open, open, 1. Not really a C7, but it's a C chord with the right melody note. And then that note can stay there, and we need an F chord. So we can just put our 2nd finger down, and that's the final chord of the piece. So let's see how that little bit from the D minor chord sounds. Yeah, that works. I'm happy enough with that open G string there, and as I say, if you've got a low 4th string, that will sound great. Right, I'm ready to call that an arrangement. It's not a complicated one necessarily, and it's one that every other bar there's options as to whether you play a single note or a full chord. I'll write down different bits of those when I put the tab together. Obviously I've not got the tab of the full arrangement to read right here, but I'll play through it and I will try and tab out pretty close to what I'm about to play. works nicely. So the tab that you may have had in front of you all the time should pretty much match up to what I just did, because I'm now going to go off, watch this video and write out what we just did. But we've gone from a lead sheet, which is the melody line and the chords, to a full arrangement just in the course of this video. Okay, I've edited bits to stop me bumbling around and making lots of mistakes, and I've made a lot, and I'm used to doing this, so some of those chord shapes where I reach melody notes or miss off fingers are pretty much second nature to me, because I use them. Anything in the key of F is going to have lots of those similar things to the things I've just done. But that's just the process. Now, I don't expect you to know that that's an F7 chord up there, or that that's a B flat 6. Those sort of things come with experience. And also, you know, they come with time. Creating an arrangement like this can take a long time. And certainly when I first started doing this, I might have spent days doing something like this. It's only faster now because I'm used to doing it and I've done lots. So be prepared to take your time, go slowly. If you have to spend a lot of time decoding the music and counting up the spaces and the lines to figure out what note is which, then that's fine. If you need help finding the notes on the fingerboard, you'll find I've got a video that teaches all the notes on the fingerboard that has diagrams of where they are, so that will really help you as well. But my advice is to find a simple tune that doesn't have too many chords in it, one that you are already familiar with the sound of, and have a play around with it and see if you can, first of all, fit the melody onto the neck. Don't go crazy doing an arrangement until you've figured out. Imagine that I'd got a wonderful arrangement of this, and then when it went up to that really high chord, it was off the end of my fingerboard. I've got to throw it in the bin and start again. So map out your melody, play through the chords, and then start playing around with just basically getting the chord and the melody and squashing them together and seeing if you can find something that works for you. I'd love to hear your chord melody arrangements. So, you know, if you come up with any, send me a link. I'd love to see what you've managed to do with whatever tune it is that you've chosen. I hope you've enjoyed this. I hope it's helped, and I'll see you again soon. Bye-bye.